So if I was to restart n8n again, these are the 27 things I wish somebody would have taught me at the very beginning, because going into it, it's a long journey to learn all these things, but these are the things that just save so much time, at a minimum days, more like weeks, and eventually it'll be months of my time. Let's dive into this. We're going to be starting really easy and then working our way up. The first one is the difference between fixed and expressions inside n8n. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by running this particular workflow here, and we can see if we hover over field, we have something called fixed and expressions. Now, fixed is just text, okay? You can write in any text you want here. But when we switch this over to expressions, what we can have access to is JavaScript, or the ability to do whatever we want. So this is the difference between no code to low code inside n8n. So we can run, for example, math in here. So 2 times 2 equals 4. We can also do things like drag variables into our particular formulas, which will then give us a particular result, which is test over here. Okay, sweet. So moving on past this, the next thing that we can do inside n8n is we can have multiple different triggers. So for instance, a classic example is you run a business, let's say, and you have multiple different services that you offer. Each one has a different landing page, and you have a form on all of those pages. As soon as somebody fills that form out, you can have that form automatically start a workflow inside n8n, and you can attach in as many forms as you want. Now, the cool thing is that it works both ways too inside n8n, where you can have multiple triggers, but you can also have multiple paths inside n8n. So traditionally, for the first few months of using it, I only thought that you could have one path. And when I realized, it was like the smallest thing, but when I realized that you could have multiple paths, it blew my mind. Such a small piece of functionality, but it was like so eye-opening for me. But yeah, all you have to do is just drag this dot here into other paths, and then there you go. You have access to multiple paths. I can't believe it took me months to figure that out, but it did, and it was a great surprise to figure that out. Cool. The next thing here, which I think is game-changing, and one of the best things about n8n, honestly, is just pinning data and then editing data. So inside n8n, if we open up a node here, we can pin data here. What this means is that we can keep running the same workflow over and over and over again using the same sample data. Why that's really important is because sometimes when we're like running tests or whatever, like especially with like things like forms, like it can be quite tedious to always go back to the website, go down, fill out the form, start the workflow, and then you make a mistake and then you have to do that 30 times. But with pin data, all of a sudden what you could do is you could automatically pin those triggers, and then you can pin any nodes that you want, so that automatically you're just going to use the sample data that you've pinned. Okay, you don't have to rerun it every single time, encounter errors and all that kind of stuff. And if for whatever reason you want to edit the sample data here, you can easily hit this pencil button here and then change whatever it is you want. So for instance, let's say I wanted to change the budget for this client from 1,000 to 500. We could enter that in and click save. Why that's important is because let's say we have multiple paths here with filters. All of a sudden, one filter might be for a client that has $1,000 budget plus, another filter might be for somebody who doesn't have $1,000 as a budget. And all of a sudden, what we can do is change the pin data and have the data flow down different paths and through different filters, allowing us to just test things so much more easily. Like these two are some of my favorite ones. Okay, sweet. Moving on past this, we can swap out or switch data types. This one is one of the more confusing things when it comes to n8n, and it's also probably one of the more boring things, just because, well, it's just not sexy, but it's probably one of the most important things. So we'll go ahead and test this out. Inside our edit node button here, okay, we have just big blobs of text. This is just a big blob of text, nothing crazy about it. It looks like code, but it is just in text format, okay? And same kind of deal here. This is called an array. You can think about an array as a list, kind of like a grocery store list. You go to the store and you buy apples, bananas, and mangoes. Same kind of deal. You have a list here, and then you have numbers here. What we can do is we can change the data type in between these text fields from text into all of a sudden objects over here, or arrays, or numbers, okay? And they started as strings. So let's bring them back to what they were before, just so you can see the difference. And there we go. So we're changing completely the data type back and forth between the two of them. I do have a free YouTube video covering this, but I also cover this kind of stuff extensively in my school community. Again, it's one of those things where you kind of just need to master this stuff in order to become really, really good in n8n. Otherwise, it's one of those things that I find really at least held me back significantly on my journey until I really, really discovered this kind of stuff and understood it at a fundamental level. Cool. Moving past this, the next thing that I want to talk about here is webhooks. Okay. And so when we're dealing with webhooks, the problem with what a webhook is, just in a nutshell, is that you can send data to n8n. Now, inside, let's say, n8n's integrations here, they have 1,121 integrations, but the reality is that there's tens of thousands of applications. And so take, for example, like this form submission here. This isn't its own integration, but we can send data from a custom form like this straight into n8n. And how we do that is through webhooks. So webhooks wait for incoming results. So let's give an example of this. I'm going to send data from my sample post request online application here, which is just sampling, like sending random data across the internet to test and debug. So what we can do is we can wait for incoming information, and then what we're going to do is we're going to hit send over here. And the problem is that data will never arrive. And the reason why is because we have a different HTTP method here. By default, n8n is set to get. We need to put it to post. I would say anecdotally, just from my experience, 95 to 99% of the time, anytime we're dealing with data being sent over the internet, it's in the form of a post request. And so what happens is if you have this set to get, but it's sending post, it's never going to arrive. So you have to match this up. So I would just most of the time, almost always, change this to post. So we can go ahead and test this again, send it off as a post request, which is shown here, but by default it's just post for most things. Now the data is coming in on the right hand side and we have access to it. Now moving past this, the next thing I want to talk about here is HTTP requests. Now, if we open this HTTP request up, this is how we can send data to those other thousands of applications that n8n doesn't integrate into. Okay, and so the issue with this is that this can be quite tricky to set up if you're using n8n for the first time. And there's a really easy way to do this. And how we unlock the cheat code is by importing a curl request into n8n. So let's go ahead and let's take 11 labs here, for example. Now 11 labs, you can create text or speech from text. And so in the good old days, you'd have to go into the documentation, copy this all in, paste it into this HTTP request, hope you got it right. And if you didn't, you might spend hours debugging it. Now what you can do is you can literally just press copy here. Okay, we'll head back over, we'll paste into the import curl, and this will be ready to go pretty much out of the box. The only thing that we need to change is the authentication. We need to have an API key, which is essentially a password to verify who we are. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this because there's actually an easier way, and this is the next tip, where we can automatically save our passwords inside n8n. Very similarly to how we have inside Google Sheets here, credentials that are automatically saved so that we can reuse these credentials across all of our different scenarios. You can also do the same thing with HTTP authentication. And how we do that is by hitting this authentication here, and then selecting either predefined credential type or generic credential type. I'm just going to go predefined because usually they have the apps that I'm looking for. And I'm going to go ahead and type in 11 Labs API, and I can connect it in. So for instance, we could create a new one or whatnot, paste our API key in here one time, and it's just going to work every single time we use it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to test this out, and without really changing anything other than the authentication, we have our particular audio file. So I'm going to listen to this.
The first move is what sets everything in motion.
Sweet. And so it's really just as simple as that. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about here, and I'm going to drag the trigger down, is keyboard shortcuts inside n8n. So let's say that we click on this node here. We can hit on the arrow keys back and forth, and we can move between different nodes. I can hit the enter button and open it up, or the escape button and close it down. Now, another cool thing that we can do here is, like, let's say, for instance, we want to add in another node here. Let's just say it's an AI agent. All of a sudden, let's say we don't want that. We can hit Command Z and undo the past action. But if we want to redo the past action, we can hit Shift Command Z and then bring it back. So very similarly, when you're dealing with like Word docs or whatever, and you can redo and undo, you can do the same thing from within n8n. I think that that's a game changer in and of itself. Now, a couple more things that we can do here is back to this node, we can hit Command D, which is duplicate, or Control D, I think, if you're on a PC. And the next thing that we can do here, sorry guys if you're on a PC, anyways, I'm just like the biggest Mac fanboy over here. I've had them for my entire life. But the next thing that we can do is we can deactivate a node. So we can hit D over top of it, which will deactivate it, reactivate it by hitting D as well. If we want to add another node here, instead of hitting the plus button at the top right or over here, we can hit Tab, and that's going to open up our interface in order to be able to add additional nodes onto our workflow. And of course, we can hit Tab again and then close that too. We can add in sticky notes by hitting Shift S, and now we have another sticky note to work with here. And lastly, what I want to talk about is the fact that we can highlight over things and we can move everything all at the same time. We can delete it, all that kind of stuff. So if I hit down Shift and then I move the cursor over everything, now all of a sudden I can move it around. I can even copy things, okay, by hitting Command C and then going into another workflow like this and then hitting Command V and then pasting it in between separate workflows, which I think is really, really nice. This comes in handy all the time. Past this, we have trigger selections. So this I think is really nice. I actually only found out about this pretty recently here. So let's say that we want to message an AI agent. I'm actually going to go ahead and disconnect this right away. We're going to open up the chat. I'm going to type in 3 messages, test 1, test 2, and then test 3. Now we have these little arrows here. And what we can do is we can navigate through these messages that we've sent. So we can go test 3, test 2, test 1, back to test 3, test 2, test 1. Why this is important, at least to me, is because when I'm testing AI agents, I'm usually sending the same message like 50 times. It's really nice that I can all of a sudden just recycle the same message just by hitting the arrows over here. Makes my life a lot easier. Now, very similarly, when we're dealing with testing triggers, let's say you have lots of triggers like this chat node, for instance, or this node here, or this webhook in the same workflow. Anytime you hit this execution workflow down here, you never know which trigger it's actually starting. Well, now you can change that by hitting this arrow beside it, and you can choose the correct trigger that you want. So if you want webhook, just select the webhook, and that's going to be the trigger to fire when you start the execution over here. If you want it to be Telegram, you just select that, and so on and so forth. Cool. Now, moving past that, inside n8n, as a new feature, which I think is really cool, they have AI agents that you can literally attach as tools onto your main AI agent. So the main AI agent can have sub AI agents all from within the same workflow. Now, in the past, what you had to do is, well, you had to have another sub workflow over here with an AI agent, and then you had to call that sub workflow. And obviously, anytime you're dealing with multiple sub workflows, it gets complicated and error handling becomes a lot more tricky to deal with. And the cool thing is now you can have it all in one place. You can see where the error is originating. It's a lot easier to debug. So I really like that. Now, if we do decide to use sub workflows still anyways, and let's just open this up here, we have this particular trigger here, okay, when executed by another workflow. And there's multiple different ways that we can pass data in between the main AI agent and the subflow AI agent. Of course, what we could do is we could just accept all data and just send whatever we want over here, but we could also define the JSON data, just very similarly to how we were talking about editing data sources and manipulating the data. We can also just define the exact data type that we want here. And so if I was to define some particular data type, all of a sudden we could see those particular fields being added over here. So message and name, we can see that it checks out. If I was to go ahead and refresh this page here and take a look at the trigger, we have message and name. And so that's what's being passed in here, okay? And this is how we can move data or variables in between the main AI agent and the sub AI agent. Now, moving on past this, one of the things that I find kind of silly is that the AI agents inside n8n, they just don't have any idea what the date is. So you could be like, hey, schedule an appointment for me today, but in the AI agent's mind, today could be like 2023, usually defaults to 2023. And so how we can tell the exact date and year down to the second, all that kind of stuff, is by entering in hashtag curly brace $now. So we can just type that in again, $now, and all of a sudden that's going to put in the date here, which we can see being displayed over here. And now the AI agent's going to know what today is, yesterday, tomorrow, all of those kind of relative dates as well. Cool. Another thing that I really like about n8n is the fact that you can really easily find the resources that you're looking for. So for instance, inside this this Google Sheet here, this might be referencing a particular Google Sheet. And sometimes I find that tracking those Google Sheets down can be quite cumbersome. They can take a bit of time, but you can hit this, this icon here, and it's literally going to load that Google Sheet up. And very similarly, you can do that with sub workflows as well. So we can hit this arrow here, and of course that's going to open up the sub workflow for us to take a look at too. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually message this agent. I'm going to say, please send an email off to Jono. Okay. And so it's going to fire, it's going to hit this sub node here, and it's going to fail. And so this happens all the time. You run into an error, and it can be especially difficult to debug sub workflows inside n8n. How we can easily solve this is we can hit the executions tab up here, and all of a sudden we have all of the records of past runs. Now, the problem is that sometimes we're like looking at nodes and we don't really know what's going on. And what we want to do is we want to get the data that was passed in here as pinned data so that we can keep testing it until we find a solution. How we do that is we can copy to the editor, and this will unpin the existing data and repin it. And now we have the exact data that was passed in from that main AI agent. And then we can go ahead and keep testing this out as many times as we want down here until we solve this particular workflow, and then it's working properly. So that alone saves me so much time. Okay, cool. Moving past this, we have version history inside n8n. But so if you hit this clock icon up at the top here, what you can do is you can have access to all of the past versions of this workflow. So if you ever save a mistake by accident, you can come back and actually change that, and then you have a past version ready to go. Now, just keep in mind with n8n, depending on the version you're on, it might only give you access to 1 day, but yeah, just keep that in mind. Past that, I want to talk a bit about error handling, just because if you're using n8n for long enough, you're going to run into a lot of errors. First thing is that we can define a catch-all error for like the whole workflow. So if we come in here and hit these 3 dots up at the top, and we go to settings and we go to this section right here, you can define a particular workflow where anytime this workflow has an error, you send all of the information over there. So I have this catch-all workflow here, okay? And what this can do is it can trigger this particular workflow right here, which can then notify our team on Slack anytime an error happens. We're like, hey, you need to change this, and then we'll go ahead and do that. And so that's really, really nice. On individual nodes here, and I'm just gonna drag this trigger down below so we have access to this, we can define success and error paths. So for instance, if we were to go test this workflow out and this drew an error, which it did because it's trying to access a particular site without an HTTP in front of it, which is drawing an invalid URL error, we can again just have an error path here that sends data to Slack for us to be notified. And how we do that is by going to the settings here and then having this on error function here, which we're continuing the workflow just using an error output over here. So another path. Now, very similarly to having that error output, what we can do here is if we run into an error, we can continue the workflow even if an error occurred. Because by default right now, how this works is that a workflow is just going to shut off. So for instance, by default, it's set to stop workflow. If we were to test this workflow out, we're going to encounter a workflow or an error. And the reason why is because I have all of these names just as samples, but the first one doesn't actually contain a name here. And so because it doesn't contain that name, it's drawing this error down here. But if we open Google Sheets up, go to the settings, and we say continue, okay, and we also enter in, always output data, this is going to make sure that the workflow runs regardless of the fact that the first option here doesn't have a name, okay? Which is super useful because, again, if you're like processing hundreds or thousands of different records and all of a sudden one of those records makes a mistake and then shuts off the whole workflow, that's going to waste a lot of time and effort, which obviously you don't want to go through. And unfortunately, I've had to go through so many times in the past. Now, one last thing that I want to mention here is about something called rate limiting. So with rate limiting, what that is that you can only send a given amount of requests to pretty much any software application out there in a given time interval. So what that means for Google Sheets is you can send 300 requests in 1 minute. You can update or you can create 300 rows in a given minute. If you try to go to 301, you're going to encounter issues. So if you're processing a lot of data really quickly, this is going to encounter an error. How we can bypass that is we can set a loop here. And this loop will go through all of those names one by one, and it will add them individually. And then it'll go to the next one, add the next one, and then go to the next one, add the next one, and so on and so forth. And we set a wait timer here for 1 minute so that it's never going to hit 300 requests per minute. It's only going to max out at 60 requests per minute. Cool. So we're going to go ahead and test this out, and we're going to add those names in one at a time. So I'm going to open this particular Google spreadsheet up, and we can actually see 1 second apart all of these names being added in. We have Sarah here. Next name is going to come in a second afterwards, and so on and so forth. Cool. And so the next thing that I want to talk about is merging data in together. So classic example is you have a Telegram message coming in. Maybe that's an audio message. Maybe that's a text message. In either instance, you want to process the information. And so what we can do if we open up this node here is we can feed both paths, the audio path and the text path, into this particular node here to feed into the AI agent. So why this is important is because essentially what we're doing here is we're referencing the same key of the previous node. And so when we're dealing with data inside n8n, it comes in key value pairs. So for instance, the key that we're referencing is text, and then it supplies the value. So if we reference text here, okay, in this particular node here, the value is going to be, hey, how's it going, right? Just like over here. And so as long as we have the same key, which is text over here and text over here, then it doesn't matter which path this goes down, it's still going to reference the same message, whether it's audio or whether it's text. Sweet. So moving on past this, I want to talk about functions here. This is where it goes from no code to kind of low code automation inside n8n. I'm going to fire off this particular workflow, and we're going to give some examples here. So first of all, I have my name where I'm like screaming at the computer in all caps over here. And what we can do is we can run something like dot to lowercase over here. And then that brings my name down to lowercase. We could even do other things in here as well, like to title case all of a sudden. And sometimes dot to title case doesn't actually work if it's all cap letters, but you get the point. Is like we can change all of this kind of stuff however we want. To sentence case would be sentence case where it's not a capitalized C on my name, and so on and so forth. We can also run math on a particular two numbers, so 2 times 2 equals 4, and we can also run something like a replace. So all of a sudden, I could replace my first name here with the title Mr., and instead of it being Jono Catliff, now it's Mr. Catliff. Cool. And so that's essentially how functions work. You do not need to necessarily know JavaScript functions or JavaScript or anything like that. You just need to ask the right questions to ChatGPT, and then it will give you the answers that you're looking for. Cool. Moving past this, inside n8n, a lot of the times, pretty much, well, every time, it's going to add an attribution to your messages, which is a giant pain. So if you've ever like sent an email or sent a Telegram message and you see it says this message was automatically sent by n8n, you're scratching your head being like, I definitely don't want that in my in my messages. You're not alone. How we remove this is if we go into our particular node here, and we can enter and add a field, append n8n attribution, and just make sure this is checked off, and then all of a sudden it's going to remove that append attribution. Last thing that I want to cover in this video, and one of the most important things that I want to cover in this video, is formatting data inside n8n. So let's go ahead and test this trigger here. Now, what we have is an email coming through, and this email contains text, okay? This text is just providing lead information like name equals Jono, email equals jono@gmail.com, budget equals $1,000, service equals landscaping. But again, this is contained within text. What we can do is we can turn that text field here, okay? So we can turn this text field into an object through OpenAI, and the secret sauce is in this assistant message over here. We can define the output as JSON data. And again, you can just ask ChatGPT, hey, can you structure this JSON data for me? Paste in here and you're good to go. And then it will output the data like this. You also just need to make sure you check off output content as JSON data, and then it can turn it into here. Now, for instance, if we didn't do this and we execute it again, it would just turn this response into text, okay? And so that's exactly what we want to avoid here. Now, the reason why this works is that this assistant message is essentially defined how the output is. So we can define the output structure in this assistant role. It will essentially shape how this data is manipulated or transformed when it's processed. Very similarly, we can also do this through this particular AI agent here. And so the same process can be done if in this AI agent, we add in this checkbox here where it requires specific output format, okay? We can add in a structured output parser. We can pass in the exact structure that we want. And again, it will go ahead and process the information however we define it as. Cool. So that's it for this video, guys. Really appreciate your time. If you guys are looking to learn more about AI automation and take it to the next level, highly recommend taking a look at my Skool community here. There's a lot of different value in here. Of course, we have a community of very active people that are, on the same page, trying to learn this stuff, implement it into building their own businesses and automating their own businesses. There's two major transformations here. The number one is to, of course, make money with AI automation, creating your own AI agency. And I'll just give you the exact roadmap and assets and everything that's worked for me. I've already scaled 2 7-figure businesses in the past. And also the second transformation is for those of you looking to automate your existing business. Again, I've already automated like up to 80 or 90% of my existing business, and I'm going to give you the exact blueprints on how I did it so that you can literally just import it into your business and get similar results as well. So thanks guys so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely day, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks and bye-bye.